The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. Opill is a game changer for sexual reproductive health. They're the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Finally, the days of needing a prescription to get birth control are over. Opill is FDA approved, no prescription needed, full prescription strength, estrogen-free, and available online and at most major retailers. So when there's no prescription, no appointment, there's no hassle. No more waiting at the doctor's office to get a prescription. Opill will be easily accessed over the counter, in store, or online, and will be ready for when you need it. Opill is available online and at most major retailers. Use code GIGGLY for 25% off your first month of Opill at opill.com.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Hi, I'm Christy Schreiber, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Schreiber, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. This is our third and final episode on Oscar Wilde's timeless comedy of manners, if you will, The Importance of Being Earnest. In episode 1, we introduced Oscar Wilde. We talked a little bit about his life and the controversy surrounding it and the opening of the play and the beginning of the play. In episode 2, we discussed several literary techniques associated with satire in general, and this play in particular, terms like epigram and neologism, irony and paradox, which is still a very confusing topic to me. But we also introduced the best word of the play. It's a neologism, the word Wilde made up, but is at the heart of the humor of the play. And of course, I'm talking about our favorite word, Bunbury. So to Bunbury, as we learned, is to have a made-up excuse that meets the criteria of polite society as an appropriate excuse that a person uses to miss a social engagement that you don't really want to attend. Wilde has made it into a verb, to go bunburying, as Algie says in the play. And today we will continue our discussion of satire as we finish talking through Acts 2 and 3, highlighting a few ideas that jump out at us as being particularly relevant to what we consider to be the most interesting takeaways from the play. We will finish the episode talking about those timeless themes, and we will argue that there are timeless themes that have continued to make this Victorian play relevant and funny generation after generation for over 100 years.
Well, since we're talking about terms, we don't want to forget the historical terms, do we? And the one that I have in mind is the word dandy. I mean, it is a dated word, but it's obviously the word that is meant to describe these two gentlemen, Algernon and Jack. They are stereotypical dandies. They have lots of money, no responsibility, an interest in dressing well, an interest in being in fashionable society. And that appears to be all that they are interested in because they have little regard for anything else. And yet everything in the play is a spoof. Everything is big and bold and making fun of something. In fact, depending on how you interpret the ending, maybe it's not even trivial like they pretend. Maybe they're not trivial as they pretend to be. Everything in the play is meant to be taken in fun. Every line, every behavior, every plot twist. One of the ways that Wilde creates the fun is by spoofing this fictional love story, pattern, or this archetype, so to speak, of this damsel in distress who falls in love at first sight with a rough man of the world, and she will, of course, refine him with her love.
Oh, the basis of the entire Harlequin romance book industry right there. Woman falls in love with a bad boy and is able to tame him and reform him with her love. I mean, it's an industry.
Except, how bad are these boys, and do they even reform? I feel like it's pretty questionable. But here's an even better question. Is there even any love in this play? I mean, we don't really care much about these characters. They're certainly not good people. We don't really care if they find love or not. But we are meant to care that they end happily ever after, which, of course, spoiler, they do. I know spoiling it, I'll tell you, doesn't take away from the fun of the play. So as we finished our discussion last episode when we were talking about the end of Act 1, we'll pick back up here in Act 2, and we'll introduce Cecily, Jack's ward. In other words, Jack is a guardian of this young, older teenage girl. She stays tucked away in the country under the tutelage of a woman named Miss Prism. She's obviously bored with this lifestyle that she's living out here in isolation. And as Act 2 opens up, Cecily and her tutor are discussing her education. Miss Prism wants her to learn German, and Cecily has no interest in German. But she's certainly fascinated in keeping a diary where she records all sorts of things that never happen. I mean, her world out in the country is a fantasy, and it mostly involves things that she imagines in her head. In the initial conversation where we're introduced to her, we get another insight. Well, the audience is given an insight about Miss Prism. Miss Prism reveals that at one point in her life, she wrote a 3-volume novel. Cecily asks Miss Prism if it ended happily. Cecily doesn't want it to end happily because happy endings depress her, so she says. And in response, Miss Prism delivers one of those epigrams that has taken on a life of its own. She says this: "The good end happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means."
That is one of those quotes that shows up on Goodreads. I mean, it's an interesting quote because, in an obvious sense, Wilde is making fun of melodramatic writing. Of course, this is more true about American movies than European movies, but the cliche is in a feel-good movie, especially the good end happily and the bad unhappily. However, somehow the way this line lands in this context is different. The paradox feels deeper, almost as if he's saying, that's fiction, that's not life. In life, the opposite occurs. The good end unhappily and the bad happily. Or at least there is the possibility that that could occur.
Oh, for sure, I agree. And that line almost always, by the way, gets a laugh every time I've seen it performed on stage. I mean, people feel that subtext. But what is even more important to the plot of the story anyway, is that when Cecily asks Miss Prism about her 3-volume novel, Miss Prism tells Cecily that the novel was abandoned in the sense of being lost or mislaid. And of course, we will find out in Act 3 that that's literally exactly what happened. It was lost and misplaced, or mislaid, although at this point it feels kind of metaphorical. As the two continue to talk, but before Cecily's love interest shows up, which will be Algernon, we meet one more ridiculous character in this play, but humorous, Dr. Chasuble, the minister. And as we watch Miss Prism and Dr. Chasuble interact, we see that they are obviously flirting with each other. They want to spend time together. We also learn that even a minister of the church and an esteemed person of the educational profession also Bunbury. Except the Bunburys of these two are not brothers or invalids. The Bunburys are ailments. Miss Prism suffers from headaches. When it's convenient, of course.
I think that's not uncommon. That's well used. That Bunbury is so cliche, it's really become a kind of an internet meme.
Oh, I agree. I mean, we can all enjoy a good headache when it's convenient. But back to the spoof, this ruffian, Algernon, enters the scene pretending to be Earnest, Jack's bad boy brother. And this, of course, makes Cecily excited. She is the stereotypical, fresh, innocent, isolated, overprotected girl who's heard about this wicked man, and she has been dreaming about him. She reveals to Algernon, or Earnest as he calls himself, that her Uncle Jack is in London buying Earnest an outfit so he can go to Australia. Of course, when she and Algernon are having that conversation, Jack comes back from London. He meets Chasuble in prison and tells them that Earnest is dead.
Oh my, it's getting confusing. and thus another great example of dramatic irony. And this is where it gets confusing if you're not paying attention. So Jack, at the beginning of the play, was going by the name Earnest. Now he's going by the name Jack. But Algernon now is going by the name Earnest, but Jack doesn't know that Algernon is there pretending to be his brother, but we in the audience do know. I also want to point out that while being sent off to Australia sounds like a vacation to us, as we think of Australia being a first world nation with amazing beaches and koala bears and kangaroos, and in the 19th century it was a penal colony. In other words, it was a destination for prison convicts.
Well, the dramatic irony is just going to increase when Cecily confronts Jack and tells him his brother, Earnest, is in the dining room, having only arrived 30 minutes before. Jack responds, "What? Nonsense. I don't have a brother." The line's funny because we know that's exactly true. He's been lying to Cecily her whole life about having a brother. But then again, I digress from my original point about highlighting that this is an elaborate joke on this love at first sight trope. A spoof, as Gary, you said, on the Harlequin romance. But Algernon, after his humorous exchange with Jack, does exactly that. He confesses true love to Cecily. He says this, "I hope, Cecily, I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection." I know you say that about me all the time. He goes on to say this, "Cecily, ever since I first looked upon your wonderful and incomparable beauty, I have dared to love you wildly, passionately, devotedly, hopelessly." I mean, John Donne couldn't have said it better. This is a wild declaration of love, and he claims to be a dandy.
Oh, that's a little bit too much, you think? All right, to which Cecily responds that they have already been engaged 3 months, and it has all been recorded in her diary. But I want to point out the quickness by which Wilde has Algernon do an about-face from his attitude towards women in Act 1 versus his attitude towards women in Act 2. It seems that Algernon wasn't really a dandy at heart. Even that was a fake. He was playing a role. As soon as he sets foot in this natural setting, the country, away from society, he falls in love. Algernon is romantic at his core, but in society, he's pretending to be something else. And this play is all about false. In society, he plays the role of a dandy, but in the country, he plays a different role.
That's exactly what this play seems to be about. I mean, society is what's false. Look at Miss Prism pretending. Dr. Chasuble is pretending. Cecily is the funniest pretender of all. I mean, this business about her diary, it's literally total fantasy. She writes letters from herself to Earnest and from Earnest to her. When we read this, I read this play a couple weeks in class with my kids, and I had a student, he was supposed to be reading this part, and he stops and he says, "This girl's crazy." Because she just has made up this entire world that could not possibly be real, and she records it all in her diary.
And yet, we are not meant to think that she's crazy.
No.
As audience members or readers, we take her seriously when she declares that the dream of her life is to love someone with a particular name. It makes no sense to love a name instead of a person, but that's exactly her dream. So let's read these lines. They are both funny and ironic.
"You must not laugh at me, darling, but it had always been a girlish dream of mine to love someone whose name was Earnest. There is something in that name that seems to inspire absolute confidence. I pity any poor married woman whose husband is not called Earnest."
But my dear child, do you mean to say you could not love me if I had some other name?
"By what name?"
Oh, any name, like Algernon, for instance.
"But I don't like the name Algernon."
Well, my own dear, sweet, loving little darling, I really can't see why you should object to the name of Algernon. It is not a bad name. In fact, it is rather an aristocratic name. Half of the chaps who get into bankruptcy court are called Algernon. But seriously, Cecily, if my name was Algie, couldn't you love me?
I might respect you, Ernest. I might admire your character, but I fear that I would not be able to give you my undivided attention.
Cecily, your rector is here, I suppose thoroughly experienced in the practice of all the rites and ceremonials of the church.
Oh, yes, Dr. Chasuble is a most learned man. He has never written a single book, so you can imagine how much he knows.
I must see him at once on an important christening. On most important business.
And of course, the audience, when he says that word christening, is clued in to Algernon's plan. The word christening is a religious term and applies to several denominations of the Christian faith, but specifically in this case to the Church of England. But Gary, for those of us who are not members of the Church in England, explain to us what's a christening and what's unique about christenings in the Victorian era, and why would this be a funny line for a grown man to say?
Of course, christenings are not just unique to the Church of England, as you mentioned, but a christening is another name for infant baptism. And this is a sacred moment where water is spilled on the head of a child. Essentially, a christening welcomes a child into the Christian faith. It's a very serious and religious affair, and godparents are chosen for the child as spiritual mentors, and the commitment that they publicly make at this ceremony is a lifelong commitment to be dedicated to the spiritual well-being of the child being christened. At the ceremony, a vicar or a minister, to use a more familiar term, baptizes the child with water, and many family and friends are present, prayers are said. And these practices are still common and are very serious ceremonies, and in some denominations are sacraments of the church. So, to make light of that part of it is a little funny. But to add to that, in the Victorian era, a christening was also a social affair. Wasn't everything a social affair back then? Invitations were sent out for friends and family to attend. The christening would usually happen when the baby was around 6 weeks old, about the time the baby could safely be around people. And friends and family would be excited to meet the new baby. A beautiful and ornate robe made from satin or silk would be made, often with a hood or a mangle. And during the ceremony, the godmother would hold the baby and the godfather would give the first name of the child publicly for the first time. Basically, a christening is when a baby is presented to society. So in a sense, even though today it doesn't work that way, in Victorian England, a baby would publicly and officially receive his or her name at the christening. That's why we hear the term from time to time, or the question, what is his Christian name? And the person is asking basically, what is a person's first name? Meaning, what name did they give you at your christening? So essentially, the joke is that Algernon is going to get the minister to christen him again with this name, Earnest, since that's the name Cecily likes, even though that would totally not be a thing that could happen in real life. You cannot be christened twice, and most certainly would a vicar would not baptize anyone at a moment's notice like that.
And yet what we see is not one, but both of our protagonists are going to make appointments to be christened because they want to receive this new name of Earnest, and all of this for true love. I mean, they're making sacrifices for their love. But why? Because their love interests, and this is interesting, care more about the name of the person than the person. So if they want to have the love of the right woman, they must have the right name. And in this case, that name is Earnest. And of course, this brings us back to the central idea of the play. Everything in life is about form over sincerity. Matters of form are of the utmost importance in life and even death. Emotion is nothing. Public impression is everything. And this would be something every audience member, and even we sometimes know this can be true in our own lives.
Well, sadly, and to our own chagrin, this is true for us in many contexts as well. Form over substance often rules the day, and many people wonder why this was so ingrained during the Victorian age. So the Victorian age is going to be the first age of the large middle class, and that's what brings a lot of this about.
Well, as we move through the play, it becomes obvious that Gwendolyn and Cecily are foils.
Now, for those of us that think of foils as a mathematical process or something made from aluminum that we put over our food in a fridge or that we wear in our tin hats, but let's remember that foils are characters that compare in obvious ways and they contrast in obvious ways.
Yes. When we think of their differences, these things can stand out. So Gwendolyn has a mother, Cecily does not. Gwendolyn is from the city, Cecily is from the country. But there's a lot of things that are the same. I mean, Gwendolyn and Cecily are motivated by a desire to find love in marriage. They're both very concerned with appearances. Both record and read things in their own diaries. But most obviously, both are obsessed with the name Earnest. They are among the social elite of the Victorian society. And we learn that both are much stronger and more socially savvy than they pretend to be. When we meet, we also learn that neither one of them is ready to just give ground to the other, especially when they learn that they are both engaged to marry Mr. Earnest Worthing. Let's read this kind of funny exchange. Dearest Gwendolyn, there is no reason why I should make a secret of it to you. Our little country newspaper is sure to chronicle the fact next week. Mr. Earnest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
My darling Cecily, I think there must be some slight error. Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me. The announcement will appear in the Morning Post on Saturday at the latest.
I am afraid you must be under some misconception. Ernest proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday at 5:30. If you would care to verify the incident, pray do so. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read and train. I'm so sorry, dear Cecily, if it is any disappointment to you, but I'm afraid I have the prior claim.
Oh, it would distress me more than I can tell you, dear Gwendolyn, if it caused you any mental or physical anguish. But I feel bound to point out that since Ernest proposed to you, he clearly has changed his mind.
If the poor fellow has been entrapped into any foolish promise, I shall consider it my duty to rescue him at once and with a firm hand.
Whatever unfortunate entanglement my dear boy may have gotten into, I will never reproach him with it after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an occasion of this kind, it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure.
Do you suggest, Miss Fairfax, that I entrapped Ernest into an engagement? How dare you? This is no time for wearing the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
I'm glad to say that I have never seen a spade. It is obvious that our social spheres have been widely different.
Oh, Gary, would we call this female aggression?
Of course we would, and it's brutal. And I would like to make a comment here very quickly and insert this. Males are almost universally unaware of female aggression when females are aggressing each other.
I think they could have noticed that, though.
I don't know if they would have understood the intensity of it. But anyway, any man who thinks that women are not aggressive or even more aggressive than men, that man is just naive. I mean, this exchange is a hilarious expression of how women can attack in the most polite way. I mean, we see subtle sabotage by agreeing with something on the surface and then undermining it. Then we see all these backhanded compliments and all this indirect communication. And, of course, over the course of the conversation, the girls get more and more open about the aggression. Then it shifted from using first names to using the more formal last names. Then, of course, the line at the end where Cecily says, "When I see a spade, I call it a spade." If you don't understand the line, it's okay. It's actually a classical allusion. Really, it's been mistranslated. Here's a little nerdy background for you. I mean, in Greek, there's a book by Plutarch with the phrase in Greek that says, "Call a fig, call a trough, and call a bowl a bowl." In 1542, when the phrase was originally translated in English, the word for trough was mistranslated to spade. For some reason, that spade line stuck, and we've been using it ever since. And a spade is a gardening tool. And now, this phrase has stuck to mean calling something what it is. It has historical history that goes deep and likely is off color, or in other words, even vulgar, which is something Wilde probably knew. So he's literally having Cecily use an off-color pejorative insult here, which Gwendolyn counters by calling Cecily, albeit indirectly, just a country bumpkin.
And of course, if you are, unable to detect, like maybe a man might, the subtle hostility in the conversation, you should notice it when it develops further when they sit down to take tea. I mean, Cecily asks Gwendolyn if she wants sugar in her tea. Gwendolyn says no. And then Cecily goes ahead and puts 4 lumps of sugar in her tea.
Well, it's funny because it's so passive-aggressive. But the larger point Wilde is making is how utterly inauthentic this whole charade is. Neither girl is concerned about anything but appearances. And notice how Gwendolyn talks about her diary. She says she takes it on train so she'll have something to read. That's not what diaries are for. Diaries are personal. They are something you take to write in. But what does Wilde mean? I mean, Gwendolyn views her life as something to be displayed. And so does Cecily. Her diary is also a production. It's a work of fantasy. It's something to be displayed. And as we watch them take tea, Gwendolyn wants to eat bread and butter, not because she likes bread and butter, but because it's fashionable. I mean, they look at everything, including their own lives, with this detachment. Something to appreciate, something to admire. They're on display.
To themselves.
Yes.
But the question becomes, who are the worst characters in the play? I mean, is it the boys who are bumbling around or the girls who are pretending? I
think that's the question that Wilde is raising. Who is the worst? Or even a better question, what's the point of all this?
Correct. I mean, Wilde questions society and what we value in so many ways. And that comes to a head in this last act. When we end Act 2, we read these lines from Algernon. I haven't quite finished my tea yet, and there is still 1 muffin left. I mean, the stage direction says that Algernon is supposed to be eating when the curtain closes. Algernon, I want to point out, has done nothing but eat for the entire play. When something recurs, by the way, over and over again like this in literature, we call that a motif. When we see a motif, we know that it's probably theme-related, and we should be asking ourselves a question. We should be asking, why is this coming up over and over again? And so then we have to ask here, why are we obsessing over this food all the time? What did it have to connect with that conversation that we just witnessed?
Well, I don't mean to get political here, but...
Oh, you don't?
I think I will for a minute. For a man who is so deliberate about everything that he drops into this play, we can't for 1 minute overlook the fact that Oscar Wilde is Irish. And as many Irishmen at the time were, he's also a socialist. Now, why would I bring that up in response to your question about why Wilde has Algernon eating all the time?
Does it have to do with the Irish famine?
Yes, it does. From 1841 to 1850, over 2 million refugees were forced to flee Ireland for Great Britain due to the famine. Another million left the continent and either moved to America or Australia. And then almost 1 million Irish died of starvation and hunger. And the famine was a result in part of British imperialism and what many have argued at the time was destructive economic policy by the British that was potentially careless and at least selfish, so to speak. And I cannot imagine a man so sensitive to history is not making a subtle reference here by making food the center of the play. And may I note that the most violent scene in this play is this scene between Gwendolyn and Cecily, and it's also over food.
So you're saying, let me understand, that you think he's criticizing the upper class of society right under their noses for being so self-obsessed, so trivial, so self-absorbed, so insincere that people could be literally starving and they don't see it because their lives are so trivial.
Well, yes, I think it is something like that, and I can give you a modern-day example of how this appears. You can have a group of people where one of the workers is doing something wrong. The whole group gets lectured. The person who is the most guilty is the first one in their own mind to say, oh, I would never be like that. So this is what these people are doing in the audience as they're watching.
Well, when we get to Act 3, the thematic undertone becomes more overt. Maybe you'll catch it then, audience. The men have been exposed for pretending to be people they're not. Algernon confesses that he's pretended to be Earnest because he wanted to meet Cecily, and this is how Cecily responds. Well, that certainly seems like a satisfactory explanation, does it not?
Yes, dear, if you can believe him.
Oh, I don't, but that does not affect the wonderful beauty of his answer.
True. In matter of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing.
Form above all. I love those lines. You know, when Lady Bracknell, or Gwendolyn's mother, returns to the stage, we get even more overt obsession with form over substance. I mean, she revisits the issue of Jack being found in a train station and then wants to know the pedigree and financial status of Cecily, who Algernon claims to be in love with. She finds out that Cecily has a satisfactory address, she has good pedigree, but most importantly, Cecily has 150,000 pounds. When she hears that, Lady Bracknell exclaims, Miss Cardew seems to me a most attractive young lady now that I look at her. Few girls of the present day have any really solid qualities, any of the qualities that last and improve with time. We live, I regret to say, in an age of surfaces. I mean, this is just ridiculous. She goes on to criticize, Cecily's dress, her hair, her profile, even her chin. Algernon admonishes his aunt for pointing out all these flaws, and he says, I don't care about them. To which Lady Bracknell famously responds, Never speak disrespectfully of society, Algernon. Only people who can't get into it do that. Dear child, of course you know that Algernon has nothing but debts to depend upon, but I do not approve of mercenary marriages. When I married Lord Bracknell, I had no fortune of any kind, but I never dreamed for a moment of allowing that to stand in my way. Well, I suppose I must give my consent.
So, in other words, she was poor when she married Lord Bracknell and very much married for money, something she is encouraging Algernon now to do.
Yes, and Jack, of course, is also a mercenary. I think we should define that word, even though Lady Bracknell used it, because a mercenary is someone who does something just for the money. We hear it a lot, in history books when they say a mercenary soldier, a soldier that one country paid to fight in somebody else's war. I mean, when someone says or calls you, says that you're being a mercenary, they're basically suggesting that you're doing something just for the money and you don't really believe in the cause at all. Everyone in this play is a mercenary, and perhaps everyone in all of society is one. And Jack does what mercenaries do. Look at here what he does with Lady Bracknell. He's going to negotiate. He says to Lady Bracknell that he objects to Cecily's marriage because Algernon is dishonest. He claims that he alone has Cecily's best interest at heart. This conversation is just as insincere and as passive-aggressive as the one between Cecily and Gwendolyn. I mean, this is a negotiation. He confesses to Lady Bracknell that Cecily can only have free access to marry whoever she wishes without his consent only when she's 35. I mean, and the way they talk, it's just like that conversation with Gwendolyn and Cecily. It's all very sweet, and it's all very passive-aggressive. But then again, it escalates, and at the end of the conversation, he will offer her a deal. If Lady Bracknell will allow him to marry Gwendolyn, he will allow Cecily to marry Algernon. I mean, that is just the most obvious of transactions. You can't make it any more clear.
So in other words, everybody gets paid.
Correct. And the closing of the play brings us back to Miss Prism. And this is where all the loose ends are tied up. It turns out that long ago, that day in Victoria Station, the governess in charge of Jack was the very same Miss Prism. So let's read this dialogue between Lady Bracknell and Miss Prism, and this is after they've negotiated all the arrangements. Prism, come here, Prism. Where is that baby? 28 years ago, Prism, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104, Upper Grosvenor Square, in charge of a perambulator that contained a baby of the male sex. You never returned. A few weeks later, through the elaborate investigations of the Metropolitan Police, the perambulator was discovered at midnight standing by itself in a remote corner of Bayswater. It contained the manuscript of a 3-volume novel of more than usually revolting sentimentality, but the baby was not there. Prism, where is the baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mentioned, a day that is forever branded on my memory, I prepared as usual to take the baby out in its perambulator. I also had with me a somewhat old but capacious handbag in which I had intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction that I had written during my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction, for which I could never forgive myself, I deposited the manuscript in the bassinet and placed the baby in the handbag.
Of course, as the dialogue continues, it surfaces that the baby indeed is Jack. Lady Bracknell's sister, Mrs. Moncrief, is Jack's brother, thus making Jack and Algernon, unbeknownst to them, this whole time brothers. Oh, and by the way, Jack's birth name is Earnest. To quote Miss Prism, the good end happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means. Of course, in this case, no one ends unhappily, and we are left to wonder if there is anyone good in the story at all. Everyone appears to be mercenary, even the church. And now what are we to think of Miss Prism? I mean, she neglected a child and left him in a train station. But it is fiction, and in the end, it ends happily. And because it ends so happily, and the story is so hyperbolic about things that are just trivial, most audiences are going to leave the theater in a good mood thinking you just watched a play that was completely about nothing. But Gary, I don't really think that's what we're doing.
No, I don't think it's true either. There is a lot that is going on under the surface. In fact, I think Oscar Wilde is just as passive-aggressive in his script as his characters are in their dialogue. And I want to go back to the politics for a moment. I brought up Ireland when we were talking about food as a motif, but I want to bring it up here when we're talking about Victorian Station. And I know this is a history nerd way to approach this play, but it's certainly not a coincidence. And we know from some of Wilde's other writings that he was most certainly a socialist and potentially an anarchist, which was popular at that time. We know that he held sympathies for the Irish causes. And between the years 1881 and 1885, the Irish were directly terrorizing the British in response to the famine and some of the oppressive politics that had been plaguing Ireland. On October 30th, 1883, there were 2 near simultaneous blasts on the London Underground that resulted in dozens of serious injuries and lots of destruction of property. And this was to begin a series of events known as the Dynamite War. It was organized by the Irish Republican Brotherhood as well as some other insurgents groups and the Fenians. On February 25th, 1884, a clockwork time bomb deploying a small revolver as a detonator exploded at 1 o'clock in the morning in the cloakroom of Victoria Station. The bomb had been disguised in a handbag. The bag also contained clothing and newspapers, and the damage to Victoria Station was extensive, but no one was killed or even seriously injured. And actually, just to finish the story, the man who placed the bomb, William Lamasny, later accidentally blew himself up trying to plant a bomb in a drain hole under London Bridge. And there were quite a few of these bombings, and it did really terrorize the citizens of London, and it certainly hardened most British to the plight of the Irish, and it certainly kept the Irish conflict at the forefront of the British conscience Although it may or may not have made anyone sympathetic to their cause, the reason I point this out is that those details would certainly have made the ears perk up of Wilde's original audience members, not even a year after the Victoria Station bombing. Everyone knew about the handbag in Victoria Station. And Wilde put a baby in a handbag. I mean, it certainly would have been funny and ridiculous, but for a man who has just pointed out how good he is at passive-aggressive language, I have to wonder if there's something more going on there.
Well, never mind that fact. I mean, if we read through to the end of the act, there's a lot of references to explosions. If you think about it, Algernon's fake friend Bunbury has, and I quote, "quite exploded," to which Lady Bracknell replies, "Exploded? Was he the victim of a revolutionary outrage? I was not aware that Mr. Bunbury was interested in social legislation. If so, he is well punished for his morbidity." I mean, knowing the history that you just shared with us makes it clear with all these references, and some of them are out of place, to explosions, that Wilde is clearly alluding to something. I would suggest maybe the bombings.
Right, correct. The Fenians were trying to literally explode the British political system, and there is no doubt Wilde, although often mistaken for being a dandy and not a serious person, was actually very sympathetic.
And so let's get to these final thematic concluding thoughts of the play. I mean, there is no one who understood better than Oscar Wilde that society was playing a game. I mean, that those with money were playing around him, that they were consuming to excess because they could, and they were ignoring the realities. And so let's get to the final thematic thoughts of the play. I mean, there is no one who understood better than Oscar Wilde that society itself was playing a game, that those who have money are playing around, consuming to excess because they can, and often ignoring, stark realities around them. I mean, there are people in society that are distasteful people because they can live in a completely fictional world. In this case, not even losing one's own child is enough to wake you up out of your insincerity and self-centeredness. And there are a few final digs when we get to this final dialogue of the play. I think we should read these final lines as Lady Bracknell reveals that Jack's name is actually Earnest. It starts with Lady Bracknell. She suddenly remembers, as if it had been able to forget, that her sister's husband, in other words, her own brother-in-law, is named Earnest.
Yes, I remember now that the general was called Earnest. I knew I had some particular reason for disliking the name.
And then this is Gwendolen. "Ernest, my own Ernest, I felt from the first that you had no other name."
Gwendolen, is a terrible thing for a man to find out suddenly that all of his life he has been speaking nothing but the truth. Can you forgive me?
I can. I feel that you are sure to change.
So the joke is in the paradox. Gwendolen feels sure that Jack will go back to being a liar, and that somehow is a good thing.
Exactly. Because in the fake world of form over content, appearances over reality, triviality over truth, one cannot afford to be sincere, even if you wanted to be. The passive-aggressive world of power and money simply won't allow it.
And yet, as Wilde gives Jack the final lines of the play, he seems to wish the world was different.
Correct. And let's start with Lady Bracknell's line. She says this to Jack, "My nephew, you seem to be displaying signs of triviality."
And so Jack responds, "On the contrary, Aunt Augusta, I've now realized for the first time in my life the vital importance of being earnest." So, Christy, is Wilde arguing for the audience to drop the phoniness and be sincere? Or is he arguing that we should be serious about being insincere because it's how to seriously navigate a wretched world of passive-aggressive insincerity? You follow all that?
We are talking irony, which is when you mean the opposite, or are we talking paradox when you mean exactly what you say, but people think the opposite should be true when it isn't? That's the question that people have been asking since Wilde wrote the play. And honestly, I think the answer is yes and yes. It's both. It's not necessary for things often to be an either-or situation. And As we know, the richer a work of art, the more layers there are out there, and there's certainly many ways to think about things. And if we look at Wilde's life, which I can't help but do, and I think about how he might have thought about the play, we think that this was certainly true for Wilde. I mean, Wilde has many different ways of being. He's a family man. He's a gay man. He's a serious student. Wilde's the dandy. Wilde's this outlandish, flippant performer, but he's also the secret socialist sympathizer with the Irish causes. I mean, Wilde would argue, and I think he does in this play, that life is a performance, but that does not mean that it's an insincere performance. When Algie is talking about being serious about Bunburying, is he being serious and honest? It doesn't make him wrong. When Lady Bracknell talks about being a mercenary and then talks about taking care of her daughter, is she performing? Yes, but is she also being serious? We have to remember in episode 1, we talked about Wilde's belief that a play reveals more about the audience than it does about the play or about the writer. And this is what he means. We are all performing. It doesn't make us bad people. It just means we're participating in life.
I've always said that writers are the world's earliest psychologists. Wilde embraces, but also challenges the entire idea of what we now would call finding our true, authentic self. And we are all of the versions of ourselves, the performing ones, the secret ones, the ones we pretend to be, the ones we don't even understand ourselves to be. There's a lot going on.
Exactly. And in that way, we can have Jack say at the very end, it is the importance to be earnest. It is indeed vital. Vital meaning essential to life itself.
Well, goodness, and in some ways, I leave this discussion more confused than when we started, but suddenly also very interested in eating a cucumber sandwich.
That's exactly how Wilde would want you to have it. And maybe throw in a muffin.
Well, thank you for listening to our final discussion on Oscar Wilde and the importance of being earnest. It is certainly a fun piece of writing. It is also a very layered one. We know we only scratched the surface of possible interpretations, but that is how it should be. And if you have an interesting thought, never hesitate to reach out to us via our podcast channels on YouTube, our website, or any of our social media pages. And don't forget to share an episode with a friend. When you share, we grow. And as always, thank you for helping us in our effort to make the study of literature as enjoyable and as accessible to as many people as possible.
Peace out.
This is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. Opill is a game changer for sexual reproductive health. They're the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Finally, the days of needing a prescription to get birth control are over. Opill is FDA approved, no prescription needed, full prescription strength, estrogen-free, and available online and at most major retailers. So when there's no prescription, no appointment, there's no hassle. No more waiting at the doctor's office to get a prescription. Opill will be easily accessed over the counter, in store, or online, and will be ready for when you need it. Opill is available online and at most major retailers. Use code GIGGLY for 25% off your first month of Opill at opill.com.
Struggling with hot flashes, brain fog, or midlife weight gain? You're not alone. But why wait years for relief? Nearly half of women suffer for as much as 3 years before seeking help for menopause symptoms, often because they don't know where to turn. Alloy Women's Health offers science-backed, physician-guided treatment plans for your hormonal symptoms, as well as skin, hair, and sexual wellness treatments. And Alloy now offers access to competitively priced GLP-1 prescription medication to help manage midlife weight gain. Join the 95% of women who tried Alloy and saw relief in the first 2 weeks. Visit myalloy.com/alloy20 today and use code alloy20 to get $20 off your first order. Start feeling like yourself again.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.